On Sunday, the 21st of January 2018, armed forces of the Turkish Republic invaded Afrin province in northern Syria. This invasion, codenamed somewhat paradoxically as Operation Olive Branch, involved tanks, artillery, infantry and aircraft. It is a very significant event and begs a number of strategic questions for the region, for Turkey's future and for Turkey's allies. The first is there a justification for this invasion under international law? Perhaps Turkey regards this as an act of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, but I suggest it will be difficult to argue that an armed attack had actually occurred against Turkey. In any case, an armed attack by whom? By the state of Syria? Pretty unlikely. Or by the Kurdish group known as the YPG, who hitherto had enjoyed Russian support and had operated solely inside Syria. In any case, to be justified, such action would require Turkey immediately to report the matter to the United Nations Security Council to allow the Council to take measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. In the event, it was France which summoned the UN Security Council. In a closed-door session, and with the US permanent representative surprisingly absent, the Security Council neither condemned nor approved Turkey's actions. This lack of authorization left the Turkish assault in a state of international law limbo. Of course, one needs to recall this is not the first time that Turkey has bent international law to suit. On many occasions over the past few decades, Turkey has carried out armed attacks into northern Iraq without UN approval, attacking Kurdish villages in the hunt for Kurds who supposedly were supporters of the terrorist PKK organization. According to Ankara, the YPG is in reality an offshoot of that organization, an expediency which is totally rejected by Washington. A second item of concern is why Turkey is acting against warnings and in direct defiance of the foreign policies of its allies, particularly its most important ally, the USA. And even Mr. Putin has had to have his arm twisted. Russian forces supporting the Syrian regime had deployed some 300 military police to Afrin, but after lengthy discussions with Moscow, they had to be rapidly redeployed so the Turks would have a clear line of fire against the Kurds. But it is against the US that the rift is particularly stark. In the UN-authorized fight against ISIS-Daesh, the Kurdish YPG were equipped and trained by the USA. Turkey watched with dismay as the YPG and indeed the Kurdish Peshmerga had been so successful against ISIS, and how they now control about a quarter of Syrian territory, almost the whole of the northeast. The Kurds regarded the USA as their prime supporter. However, if the YPG is now to be thrown to the wolves, it must surely beg the question in the minds of many Kurds, and indeed other supposed US friends, just how much can the USA be relied on when the chips are down? Of course, Donald Trump was known to admire the ruthlessness of President Tayyip Erdogan, and successive US administrations have bolstered Turkish defenses against a possible armed attack by Syria. But how pleased will Mr. Trump now be, since the man he has admired has bitten the hand that feeds him? Anti-American sentiment is already running high in Turkey and is exacerbated by the state-controlled media, fueling nationalist anti-Kurdish sentiment. On the face of it, the Turkish invasion was triggered when the US-led coalition said it was working with the YPG Syrian Democratic Forces to set up a new 30,000-strong border force all along Syria's northern border. This, of course, infuriated President Erdogan, who stated during a speech in Ankara last Sunday, "A country we call an ally is insisting on forming a terror army on our borders." He characterized US support to Syrian Kurds as undermining Turkey's security, adding, "What can that terror army target but Turkey? Our mission is to strangle it before it's even born." And just in case this might spark a reaction from Kurds inside Turkey, President Erdogan warned on Sunday that any Kurds who protested would pay a high price. So much for basic human freedoms. This now begs the third question, and it's this. To what degree can Turkey continue to be considered a dependable NATO member? Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, the attack on one is an attack on all article, is no justification for settling old scores, for ethnic cleansing, or the suppression of ethnic minorities. According to Reuters, quoting the Turkish state-run Anadolu agency, General Hulusi Akar, the Armed Forces chief, speaking at a recent meeting of NATO top brass in Brussels, said that Turkey will not allow the Turkish YPG to receive support and said NATO should not differentiate between various terrorist groups. He said, "We cannot and will not allow support an arming of the Kurdish YPG terror group under the name of an operational partner. We hope this mistake will be corrected in the shortest period of time." If that wasn't bad enough, even more imperiously, last Sunday, the Foreign Minister, Mevlut Cavusoglu, declared that anyone who opposes Turkey's operation there is siding with terrorists and will be treated accordingly. I suggest these are hardly the words of a friend and ally. Rather, they echo the nationalist ultimatums that were heard so often in the late 1930s. Internally, too, the Turkish government is becoming increasingly imperious. In the aftermath of the so-called Gulenist coup just over a year ago, as many as 160,000 were, without due process, either imprisoned or dismissed from their jobs. Moreover, recent wrangles between the Turkish constitutional and the lower law courts all seem politically motivated, and this all points to a deterioration in the rule of law. Judicial impartiality, according to the Financial Times, has now all but disappeared. Perhaps one should also recall on the sidelines that in the aftermath of the attempted coup, a number of Turks on the NATO staff actively sought asylum, while many others of middle and senior ranks still in Turkey were purged. Although NATO press announcements from Brussels portray an aura of calm and business as usual, other NATO nations, particularly the USA, must now feel distinctly uneasy about a member that seems to operate in its own self-interest, without needing the agreement of its allies. Other NATO members must, it seems, simply fall into line or just accept the threatened consequences. One has to ask then, does Turkey no longer see herself as part of an organization working to achieve consensus? Or is she now such a major regional power that she can just dictate terms? If, however, NATO membership now sits awkwardly with Turkey's unilateralist ambitions, one must also raise an eyebrow at Turkey's increasing interests elsewhere. Moscow has found it hard to conceal its delight at the growing rift between NATO members. Now, Turkey is already a dialogue member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a NATO lookalike in Asia. And one wonders if she can, in all honesty, keep her foot in each camp, especially as she is increasingly turning her back on the West and the EU in particular. So in summary, one has to be concerned about the future path Turkey will take under a maverick and increasingly nationalist President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The words of President Lincoln, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," and this applies not just to NATO, but Turkey as well. With a permanently suppressed Kurdish minority amounting to some 15 to 20% of the population, and with frequent extraterritorial forays to attack Kurds in northern Iraq and now in Syria, it is clear that Turkey is indeed dividing. This ethnic split, coupled with the growing gap between the aspirational urban middle classes on the one hand and the rural Erdogan supporters on the other, does not bode well for the future of a free country. Whether President Erdogan's neo-Ottoman, pan-Islamic actions, adventures and ambitions herald a real shift in Asia Minor, or are just the short-term nationalist escapades of an opportunist, still remains to be seen.